Brandin, EDS, is an innovative public school teacher who uses educational expertise and technological knowledge to empower families around the world. Since 2011, Ash has found innovative ways of using student interests, including video games, to increase engagement and create student-centered, immersive experiences. Ash holds endorsements in K through 12 music, secondary math, secondary language arts, administration, and currently works as an endorsed K through 12 teacher librarian. Their Instagram page, The Gamer Educator, has helped tens of thousands of families understand the appeal of video games and screens. Ash is also the author of the national bestseller, Power On, Managing Screen Time to Benefit the Whole Family, an empowering guide to parenting alongside screens and gaming. Ash, thank you so much for talking with me.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm glad to be here.
So I've been following your page for many years, and I think one of the things we share in common is trying to balance and create a positive light as well, because technology can be very beneficial, right? So I've been really interested in speaking to you about this for a long time. So let's start there. You and I both agree that healthy screen time isn't really about the amount of time available, but it's more about watching your child's reaction to the media. So can you explain what parents can look for to determine what media and the amount of time spent on screen activities is right for your family?
Yeah, well, I would say that when we're trying to navigate something in our child's life, screens or otherwise, I would say that there's no one metric that is going to answer that question. And when we are looking at something like screen time, part of the deficit, I think, in focusing only on the number of minutes is that it flattens, it takes all the dimension out of what we might be looking for. So if we were to talk about only one metric, then yes, focusing more on the reaction to it or the relationship with it, I would say is a more effective metric than time, because time is only time. It doesn't tell you how they're going to feel or what they're doing. However, I would also say that we can't only be focusing on our child, the impact on our child or our perceived impact on our child, because that assumes that that is the only variable in and having access to screens. And in many cases, that is not the case. We have seen a lot of emphasis on fear. Here are dangers. Here's what it could do. And that assumes that parents are ignorant. And I don't mean that pejoratively. Like, that assumes that parents are truly ignorant, and if they are no longer ignorant, then the problem will go away. Well, I think if that would have worked, we would have fixed it by now.
Yeah.
And that then opens up a much bigger question, which is, okay, well, if the problem isn't a lack of awareness, then what is it? And so one of my 3 central tenets is that screen time is a social inequity issue. So if I am a single caregiver or I have a partner who works the swing shift, I live in an apartment, I have downstairs neighbors, they cannot complain about me or I might get kicked out. I have no access to affordable after-school childcare. I had to go back to work because my insurance is tied to my employment and we have no parental leave in this country. And now I have 3 kids under 3 and I have no way of getting my needs met. You know what? I don't have the capacity to think about what my child's relationship is with the content on the screen. And so if we're concerned about that, it's not that I don't think it's important. It's that we have to ask, like, is that even something that a family has the capacity to be thinking about? So if we really are concerned with making sure that kids are having safe access and quote unquote healthy access to screens with their content, then we need to target the inequities that are necessitating an over-reliance or the use of screens as a space filler for those inequities. So what I would encourage parents to think about is, what can I control? So if I can't control that I need a screen, I don't have another way of meeting that need, and I need to use it in that moment. Okay, I can't control that. What can I control? So if I can control access to content, the middle part of my book, I call the screen time ABCs, which is like the 3 things that are really important to think about when it comes to screen time: access, behavior, and content. And when I'm able to view screen time as morally neutral, then it's a lot easier to look at it as data. And so if my child's having a hard time after they're watching a certain show, it doesn't do me any good to blame the show. how is that going to help me tomorrow? How is that going to help my kid learn about them and what works for them? It's not, right? It'll make me feel bad, and it won't help me tomorrow when I have no way of meeting that need. But if instead I go, okay, well, that didn't feel great. So instead, let's try a different show. Let's go outside before we watch that show. Let's take a break in the middle to, like, I don't know, hop on one foot to the bathroom and like, let's fit in some regulation. What can I do? And then if that makes a difference, great. Now we've learned something, and now our kid can learn about themselves, and that's a transferable skill that can benefit them in the rest of their life. I think that's a lot more sustainable
Yeah.
than just focusing on like one myopic criterion.
Yeah. You said three things that really stood out to me. One is, let's start with like the what are they doing, right? Like it's very different if you're doing math homework than you're scrolling TikTok, right? Like those are very different things on the brain. So I think you kind of brought this up as well, that what can you control, right? So we often talk about just helping them make choices, right? Let's not throw the baby out with the bathwater. If you're having a big reaction to a video game, let's not say we're never playing video games. Maybe we choose one that works a little bit better for your child, right? And that's kind of the way we look at it. I don't know if you agree with that. So that's the first thing. And then I totally agree that parents know. And that's where the guilt comes in. Of course, everybody knows, they watch their kids' reaction. They know that, maybe certain things aren't healthy for them. And so I completely agree about what you brought up with social equity. We actually, in our parent ed, we call it digital privilege. We kind of repurpose that idea from what used to mean not having access to internet and stuff like that. But what we say is, you talked about socioeconomic challenges, how much a family works, right? Like it can be a family of privilege, but maybe they work a lot of hours, right? And they don't necessarily have the time to devote to what they need to do to educate themselves or help their kids. And then I think you touched on this too, but the third one would be access to care. Is there a grandma around that I can lean on? Do I have the, again, socioeconomic privilege to hire a nanny, right? To keep my kids entertained? We all use it as a babysitter. Like, let's just be totally honest. I'm a parent too. We all do it. I'm so glad you brought that up, because it's so true. It doesn't even have to be what you would think of as underprivileged. It could be a very privileged family, but that might not have the time, right? So I love that you brought up those things. I don't know if you wanted to add anything else to that.
Yeah, well, and the part that I think is important to name is that you don't have to have a reason. Like, there's a lot of demonization of leisure, and that I think comes easily from the phrase of like, screens are a tool, ask what they're replacing. If I'm coming from a place where I think that screen time is bad, like inherently bad, or wasteful, or lazy, or less than, then that question, what is it replacing? That question is irrelevant, because I can come up with 15 things it's replacing. And all of those things in my mind will be better, because the implied thing there is screens are only worthy of doing when every other worthy thing has been done. And leisure is valid, right? Leisure is worthy of doing. And you deserve leisure, adults deserve leisure, and kids deserve leisure. So like, we don't have to be cramming productivity or academic readiness into every part of their lives. And just as we recognize that, again, like if our kids were doing something else, quote unquote, leisurely, like reading a book or drawing, we probably wouldn't be like, oh my God, I think they might be addicted to books, right? But we're very quick to do that with technology. There is one piece of media in my child's life that I have to regulate very, very, very strictly, and it's books. I have to pry books out of my kid's hand. I have to say, we cannot read a book right now. And if that were an electronic device, people would think my kid was addicted to books. No one has ever said a negative thing when they see my kid reading a book. Instead, they have said, oh, I'm just so glad to see that they're not on a tablet. And I'm like, if they were on a tablet, they'd be reading. And you'd be demonizing that, which shows a lot about like kind of the association that we have. So the other aspect you brought up of, having a reaction to something, like if our kids are having a reaction to a certain thing, we might think, well, maybe that's not good. I would say that a reaction to a thing, again, if they reacted poorly to how a book ended, would we say you can't read that book anymore? You gotta put it away. If they missed a goal in soccer and they got so mad and they cried and they didn't want to talk to us because they felt like they left their team down, would we say, if you can't handle this, you can't play soccer anymore? Soccer is making you mad. It's soccer's fault. Probably not. But if they play FIFA soccer on a PlayStation, we would be more quick to do that. And so the neutrality aspect is recognizing that the activity itself may not be physically real, but the emotions are real. And if our instinct is to go, I have to remove that. I'm not saying that we should allow them to play something that seems to be detrimental to them or is not sustainable for us. I'm not saying that. But if we just go, oh, we can't do that because you didn't end it perfectly every time, then we're missing the much more important piece, which is what is the skill that needs addressing?
Yeah.
Is the skill frustration tolerance? Is it emotional regulation, right? Is it executive functioning of time management, depending on like what the issue might be? Because if they also struggle with losing in soccer or not getting their way on a play date, well, that's a skill deficit across media types, right? Across things. And we can address that at a play date. We can address that on the soccer pitch, and we can address it on a screen. And the more we do that, the more our kids see that, like, oh, this isn't because I'm a bad kid. This isn't because this device is inherently morally bad. It's because these evoke different feelings, and I'm practicing this in different parts of my life. And if it's way too explosive in one particular aspect of our lives, then yes, we might protect them from that while they build the skill somewhere else. But we also know that that's like the goal is to help them build the skill, not just to shield them from the thing, because eventually that will then fall back on them as a future adult. And we need to make sure that they're prepared to handle that.
So I couldn't agree with you more, but I'll throw in one tiny bit of pushback, which is the attention economy, right? So books don't have thousands of engineers on the other side tweaking and fine tuning
Yes,
them
they do.
to make them more sticky
Yes, they do.
in real time.
What do editors do?
Yeah.
Yes, they do. And video games are not edited in real time.
Yeah. No, I'm talking more about social media and the attention economy games, like the free to play, the Robloxes, the things like that. That's what I'm talking about. Yeah.
Sure.
That's my only small pushback.
I get that a lot with, well, people will say like, but those other parts of their lives aren't engineered. I'm like, literally every part of our lives is engineered.
Yeah.
Think about food. I make many, many comparisons to food. Many foods, increasingly more and more foods that we eat, are literally engineered to make us want to eat more of them. And we know, particularly as millennials, we know that talking about food or as good or bad, kind of growing up in the 90s low-fat snack, 100-calorie snack bag era, that doesn't tend to result in a balanced relationship with food and eating. And so instead, we've seen that like swing around to talking about food as having moral neutrality, that cookies are not morally worse than apples. And that doesn't mean we serve them at the same amounts. That doesn't mean that we ignore the fact that they have different nutritional profiles. And I can also explain to my child, like, this thing is literally made to make you want to eat more of it.
Yeah.
What do we notice when we eat more of it?
Yeah.
But that's also true of apples, right? Like Honeycrisp apples are engineered to make me want to eat more of Honeycrisp apples. Otherwise, we'd all be eating only Red Delicious. So again, being able to talk about any part of our lives with that same kind of nuance, I think, is important. And I think our fear is that if we do that, that it's like legitimizing the other things. But no, it's not. I'm not legitimizing alcohol if I talk about the fact that it can compel me to do unsafe things. It's just talking about it in a way that's empowering through education as opposed to more like scarcity and abstinence.
Yeah, totally. I think we're on the same page then. Yeah, definitely. Well, let's push on that aspect of it a little bit more because you brought up alcohol. So the World Health Organization did classify video games as an internationally recognized addiction. This was in 2019. Many families do struggle with what we were just talking about, the persuasive, highly reinforcing design. And this is mostly the modern free to play games. So I'm not talking about the Marios. I'm not talking about the games that we grew up with, right? So are there healthier versions of video games, and how can parents navigate those unhealthy relationships with gaming in their households? Because this is one of the biggest complaints that I do hear about from parents in my parent eds.
Well, two things. One, that's sort of like asking, is there healthier food that will make my kid not develop an eating disorder? Right? And the answer to that is no. Because if I said you can't have cookies or Cheetos because I don't want you to have an eating disorder, well, many of us can tell you how that ended up. Like restriction does not tend to, like, abstinence only education doesn't tend to produce the best outcomes, which I just know is what you're not advocating for. And at the same time, I hear what you're saying of like, there are things that are designed in a way that are predatory. right? Like free to play design is predatory, and free to play design is much closer to gambling than it is to gaming. And that's
Yes.
a very important distinction. So when you're talking about video game addiction, I would argue that you're not talking about free to play games. I would say that's a gambling addiction. And I understand to a family that will feel like they're not necessarily going to six of one, half dozen of another. The criteria for video game or media addiction, depending on which diagnostic criteria list you're using, the DSM or the World Health Organization, they're very similar to how you classify other forms of addiction. So we hear addiction get tossed around a lot, like, oh, my kid doesn't want to stop playing, they're addicted.
Mm-hmm.
Again, it's like, well, your kid doesn't want to stop playing because it's fun. Like, your kid isn't addicted to the playground when they don't want to leave the playground, right? The criteria for addiction are very strict and very, very similar to what we might see for other potential vices that can be potentially addictive. And as you said, anything can be addictive. You can be addicted to anything. It's less about the thing and more about our relationship to the thing. So yes, I am in no way a free to play game fan. If there's one bell I wish I could unring, it would be that one. They proliferate all the marketplaces. And I think that they are really tricky and insidious, particularly because, of course, a family is going to say yes to that because it's free, right? So in my book, my chapter on content, CE is for content, delves really deeply into different types of content and a lot about free to play content. And if that is something that you either want to be able to say yes, or maybe you already have and you're like, it's Pandora's box, I cannot close it. It gives suggestions of things that you could try to do. So if you're right now at a place where you can avoid them, I would say look into one. Like, I would tell a parent, play one, like download one and play one. And I think our instinct is to go like, well, I wouldn't know how. It's like, well, your kid wouldn't know how either, but they're going to figure it out in 15 minutes. So try it, like download a game and try it. And if in the first 5 minutes, it's immediately blocking you from doing things and saying, to do this, you need to upgrade to this other thing and come back tomorrow. Don't forget to log in again. You'll get a reward if you come back. Like, if it's clearly incentivizing you to spend money, if it's telling you you'll have a better time if you just do a little bit more, right? Ask yourself, is this something I think that would be fun, right? B, I think my kid can like navigate and understand. Do they have the critical thinking to navigate this?
Yeah.
And if it's a no, then okay, it's a no. If your child is on a device that they can navigate on their own, right? Like they can go to an app store or an app marketplace and try to download their own games. I don't think there is a console that exists that does not have parental controls that allows you to block access to app stores, limit downloads, restrict them entirely, restrict purchases. So you can always put that on there as a guardrail to at least necessitate a conversation. Like in my household, we have to play it first. Like, we have to be familiar with it or play it or vet it in some way before we say yes. And in my book, I have a chapter on safety settings. And one of the advantages of that is if you're the first person to like log in and look at a game, then you can set it exactly how you're okay with. Right? So if I log into a game and I notice that it can send me notifications, I can turn it off.
Yeah.
I can toggle off any access to chats or friend requests or anything like that. One of the easiest ways, if parents are like, oh my God, that's way too complicated, I get it. One of the easiest ways to know if a game is going to be like a quote unquote safe experience, I mean, big air quotes here because I can't decide what's safe for any family. But if you're like, well, how do I just make sure they're not like talking to random people and being told to spend constant money? Turn the Wi-Fi off. Just turn the Wi-Fi off. This is my favorite thing to do with there's a name I don't remember, the kids' Kindle Fire tablets, because even though the content on it is ad-free and kid appropriate, that doesn't mean I want my child to have access to all of it. So I always just downloaded the content I knew my child would enjoy or I was okay with, and then I just turned the Wi-Fi off.
Yeah.
And if something didn't work on the Wi-Fi, then we avoided it. Because also we're often using it when we're traveling. So I don't want it to be internet dependent anyway. But if you think about it, like a purchase isn't going to work if the Wi-Fi is off. They can't communicate with other people if the Wi-Fi is off. It's very simple. And obviously there might be some perfectly safe games that do require internet. I know that this is sort of a short-term solution. But if you're listening to this and you're like, oh my gosh, this is too much, how do I get started? that's always my go-to. So just like turn the Wi-Fi off and see what you can still use.
Yeah. I mean, I think parents want the simple tips, you know, and the hack.
Mm-hmm.
That's a great one. I'll throw in a few more things because this is something where we do spend a lot of effort trying to help parents navigate. So one thing that we also say, and this goes across the board, and Tristan Harris said this, I didn't make it up, but if you're not paying for the product, you're the product, right? So
Yeah.
what does that mean? They're going to either feed you ads, which you covered, or they're going to make you buy the in-app purchases to have any type of good experience, right? They're also going to have those limited edition drops, things like that. So those are the things that are very, very tricky for kids. And like you said, potentially unsafe. But typically, and I tell parents, it's like, think about, and kids too, it's like, think about the way we grew up gaming, right? You would buy the physical thing, you'd put it in, right? It wasn't connected to the internet. That company has made its money already. Like they don't need to necessarily sell you the in-app purchases or get you to do anything else. And then the other thing we say is and I don't know if you agree with this, but if it's leveled, right? If there's worlds, levels, things like that, endings, like that's a good thing, right? Because you can say, okay, let's be done at the end of the level versus the wide open metaverse games are very hard to turn off. They're designed to be played for a very long time. So those are just some of the things we say. I don't know if you want to react to any of those, but I just wanted to add those couple points.
Yeah. Yes. What you mentioned with the games we grew up with is I agree with. And that also goes with, and you may have made this point before, and I know I have, that what we're really talking about is it's two very different types of motivation. Again, people are very quick to say like, well, they're addicting. And it's like, actually, most of the time they're motivating. So like the games that we play, commercial off the shelf games that you're paying 50, 60 bucks for, right? Imagine if after you played one level, it was like, if you want to move on, you have to pay $5 more. You'd be like, I'm never buying that again, right? Like if they were incentivizing further purchases or all of these external factors, you would not buy it, right? You would tell your friends, don't buy that, it was a waste. And the way that commercial off the shelf games work is they make them intrinsically motivating. They make you feel satisfied. They make you feel competent, connected to other people, and in control. And if you're feeling good about how you're doing, you'll want to play more. But I don't mean that in like an addictive, negative way. I mean it in the same way as like, as I learn to paint watercolors, if I feel competent, I'll want to paint more. And that's what would make me buy the next Mario game when it came out 4 years later, right?
Yeah.
And then when we look at free to play, they do not want you to be intrinsically motivated.
No.
It would be the worst business model in the world if you were intrinsically motivated to play without spending any money, because they would make no money. So they actually avoid intrinsic motivation by instead externally motivating with things like rewards, incentives, everything's external. So they're very different in terms of their motivational structure. But what I think is very funny is that I know it's not exactly the same, but we say like, well, we didn't have anything like that when we were growing up. Yes, we did. They were called arcades.
Yeah, you'd keep putting the quarters in.
Right. And it's funny because we don't ever really talk like disparagingly about like Galaga and Ms. Pac-Man, but like they absolutely were compelling you to continue playing, especially if you ever play the versions where it's like you can continue from right where you are. Just put in one more quarter.
Yeah.
I mean, come on. That's a microtransaction, right?
Yeah.
It's like the progenitor of microtransactions, and it's 40 years old. So again, these things have existed. They change shape, they change format. But I think recognizing how those kind of like continue is important. And the last thing, I won't prattle on too long, is when you talk about like setup of the game, I talk about this in my access chapter. Yes, some structures are going to be easier to stop than others. And I would say that an open world structure is not necessarily like predatory, right? It's not necessarily bad in and of itself. I do not like an open world structure. And this is one of the reasons I don't like to say that like an aspect of something is in and of itself like predatory, unless it's like a gambling mechanic. Because like you could stick me in a room for a month with Minecraft and I am not going to become addicted to Minecraft. I don't like it. I don't like open world games. I will never, like, they overwhelm me. So like, I am not motivated by that. And other kids, if you put them in a room with Mario Kart for a month, they're not going to like Mario Kart. Stop telling them what to do. Stop telling them they have to drive on the road. Let them go be in control. And so a lot of kids really, really are seeking autonomy, especially after school.
Yeah.
And so they like big open-ended things. And yes, that can be harder to stop, but that is an executive functioning skill. That is not the fault of a game. It's also hard to stop in the middle of a long chapter. It's also hard to stop in the middle of a play date. It's also hard to stop when you're working in the middle of a project. So there are lots of ways we can help with that skill. And if we have to be out the door in 15 minutes to make soccer practice, and if we're 30 seconds late, I've ruined the whole chronology of the evening, then yeah, I'm probably not going to say yes to Minecraft right then. Right. And so recognizing, again, the neutrality, it's not going, well, Minecraft is bad and
Right.
therefore we can't do it. It's this kind of game is hard to do when we are in a tight timeline. And here's why. And then we're teaching our kids time management. When I have a short amount of time, what activity fits this best? I shouldn't start a 3-hour movie. I shouldn't open up Minecraft, right? I could do something shorter.
Okay. Well, I do want to ask you about probably the most popular right now, and I would say the most tricky for parents game. I want to ask you about Roblox. So I'm going to ask you about safety, but also mental health too. So there's a couple things that came out recently in 2024. I'm sure you're familiar with the Hindenburg research report. It called Roblox a quote unquote pedophile hellscape. It detailed the sexual nature of some of their experiences. And then just in August of this year, 2025, Louisiana's Attorney General filed a lawsuit claiming Roblox facilitated, and again, quote, a hunting ground for child sex predators and safety failures, including inadequate age verification. So it's hugely popular. Approximately 60% of users are under 16. So if parents want to say yes to the game, how can they make sure it's safe and healthy? And we don't have to drill into the parental controls, but maybe just some top level advice.
One thing I think is really interesting, this doesn't actually address your question, which I will do. So the 2024 report, that research firm, they don't exist anymore. And I was so fascinated because, when I see something like that, I'm like, please, I don't want to read articles that summarize the source. I would much rather read the source, right?
Yeah.
And they are a short seller.
They're a financial research report. Like, just to be clear, they just uncovered these things as they were looking into them as
Right,
a
but
company.
they're a short selling research firm. So in their history, once they publish a report, it tends to have an impact on that company's performance that then they are able to take financial advantage of. And that's something had done, because they don't exist anymore, several times. They would publish a report, it would negatively impact the company, and then presumably they or someone would be benefiting. So, because they're specifically a short selling research firm. So I thought that was really interesting, because when I was reading it, I thought okay, I am in no way going to defend any of the content that they're talking about.
Yeah.
Right. And what they are essentially describing is the internet, right?
Yeah, exactly.
This is, of course, not unique to Roblox,
It's
right?
it's an open source game. That's why these things are allowed.
Right. But we're not, what I'm hearing is there is a lack of regulation on the internet, right? And so if that's the problem, blaming Roblox, as good as it feels, it's not going to help. If the problem is there's a lack of regulation, then we need to be targeting how do we increase regulation? Because we can shut down Roblox. Okay, that isn't really going to help if the issue is a lack of regulation that is making it possible for some of these things to exist. And again, that becomes a much harder and more nuanced conversation around what is or isn't censorship, et cetera, et cetera. There are many eye-catching, pathos-evoking things in that report. And I hate to tell people this, but no, let me say it a different way. When I was in high school, I read the play by the existentialist John Paul Sartre, No Exit. And he has a line in there where he says, hell is other people. And yeah, hell is other people sometimes. People are going to encounter things online that are rage baiting, that are intentionally evocative, that are inappropriate, that are offensive, that are racist, transphobic, etc., and do not necessarily indicate what they might be trying to evoke, for example. So if someone makes a username that is evocative of someone we associate with predatory behavior, does that mean that person is a predator, or does it mean it is a rage-baiting teenager? And it's very hard to know that. Does that mean I want my child to interact with that person? No, right? Does it legitimize that? No. But I have a very good family friend who is an expert in computer forensics as it applies to child predators. And even in our current era, he will continue to tell me that the number one risk to kids is real life, people in their real life, and people who can have access to them in their real life
But
more
people they
than
know, to
online.
be clear, usually it's people they know.
Yes,
That's what you're
yes,
saying, yeah.
yes.
Because
People they know.
typically kids are safer in the real world, like when it comes to crime. But yes, what you're saying is true as well.
Yes,
Yeah,
yes. And
yeah,
so if this is a concern, like if your primary concern with Roblox is child predators, I would say that my first question would be, is this actually an experience you want to say yes to?
yeah,
Because if it is, those are kind of hard things to reconcile, right? Those are kind of mutually exclusive things. But if you're finding yourself like, okay, but like I'm the only holdout, how do I say yes to this?
yeah,
I know you don't want to get into the weeds of it, but the most recent parental controls, do I think they're perfect? Absolutely not. Are they better than what we had, which was nothing? Yes, they absolutely are. So now again, it's not intuitive. They do not make it easy. And again, this is a regulation issue because as long as they are allowed to get away with that, as long as device company manufacturers and social media companies are allowed to, for example, put their products in the least restricted mode by default, they will, right? And if we were to, for example, regulate so that devices meant for kids or apps being used by kids had to start in the most restrictive settings, I have a feeling that all of a sudden all those parental controls would become far easier to understand
yeah,
because all of the companies would want them to take them off, right? And
yeah,
so they're very opaque, they're not easy to understand. It should not be this way.
yeah.
But there are very robust parental controls in Roblox, not ideal, but you can limit what they can see. You can control what they can and cannot have access to. You can control who they have access to. You can control whether or not they spend any money. You can block games. I wish you could do the opposite. I wish you could block by default and then say yes to
Yeah.
certain games, but you can block games and you can just sort of set across the bar, what they have access to. And then if you do have it set up that way, then Roblox will send you info about what they were playing and what they were doing if you
Mhm.
want to monitor it.
Yeah, and you can turn the chat off, which I
Right.
would definitely recommend as well. And you
Yep.
can also set the age. Like, I'm so surprised by how many parents just don't do that basic thing. Because if you do set your child's age, it will strip out those more harmful experiences generally. And I believe there's also a way to have it play, forget what the term is, but like more those approved games. So less those kind of open source predatory games, right? I think there's a setting. I don't know if you're familiar with that one. I've heard of
I
that.
don't know. Like
Yeah.
ones that are like official
Yeah. Kind of more like,
ones.
yeah.
Yeah. And again, open source, I mean, like Roblox is the YouTube of gaming,
Yeah.
right? Like,
Yes.
and YouTube Kids is not safer than YouTube if what they're watching is still not great content for them. And there are so many quote unquote adult channels on YouTube that I have approved for my kid to see on YouTube Kids because they're great. Like, and they are not technically allowed on YouTube Kids because they take advertisements. But
Right.
I'd much rather my kid watch someone like make Howl's Moving Castle out of trash and sit through a 30-second VPN commercial than see like constant kids playing with slime and like things getting crushed by the wheel of a car, which is a lot on YouTube Kids. So like there's a lot of stuff on open source on Roblox that isn't bad. They're like Plane Crazy Simulator is like a one that people have loved for years. Grow a Garden is just Farmville in a new form, right? So curiosity, and again, I know it's not fun. I would hate doing it too. But take 15 minutes to play it.
Yeah.
And if you're like, "Oh my god, I can't." Google it. Look it up on YouTube. Watch somebody else play it. And even if you don't know what's happening, if they're spending the whole time like, I don't know, bad mouthing people, like you can tell a lot by just watching someone play something of like what the ethos of the game must be. If people are sitting there calm and wandering around, that tells you a lot. And if they're like agitated and yelling and bad mouthing each other, then that kind of tells you what that game might attract, and that
Yeah.
might be enough.
I love that you keep repeating that point because we tell this to the older parents when it comes to like when we get closer to their time to introduce social media. It's like, if you're going to allow Snapchat, you better download it and understand it and know how it works, right? So I love that tip as well for video games because that makes so much sense. And I love that you compared Roblox to YouTube because what we say all the time is Roblox is social media. So again, if you think your child
Thank you.
is developmentally ready for that, okay.
Thank you. Not enough people say this, I am so glad to hear someone else say it. I'm so sorry I interrupted you. My
No, please.
enthusiasm got in the way. But this is one of the things that irks me is that we get very like, I, millennials and older, I think we silo things. We're
Yeah.
like, well, this thing is social media and that thing is this other thing. And kids do not see it that way.
Yeah.
Kids, 1000%, you are right. The first social media platform that most kids are exposed to is Roblox, arguably YouTube, depending on how they're receiving it and how they interact with it, right? Especially in terms of like parasocial, like YouTube in many ways, like a kid's first parasocial relationship, or television, frankly, right? Depending on how you think of it. But yes, social media for many kids is much more Roblox than it is TikTok. Like I don't know 9-year-olds on TikTok, but
I do.
I know thousands of 9-year-olds who are on Roblox, right? Or
Yeah.
younger than that. And I don't say that to scare people, right? That's not a reason to be like, well, that's even more reason that we should not allow. It's more thinking about the utility of like how it's being used, that for some kids, it's a way of hanging out. And that isn't necessarily better. Are they hanging out with a cousin who lives halfway across the country that they can't see and they're in a private server and they're just with each other? Like, okay, that's probably fine, right? But again, thinking about how are we using this? What's the utility? What function? What purpose is it serving? I think is really important. And if we notice our kid is really using it in a certain way, that may also tell us like, oh, do they have another way of doing that that's not on a screen? Because again, with the addiction, a big part of our relationship to a thing is, do I have other ways of meeting that need?
Yeah.
And if I don't have another way of feeling in control, and my way of feeling in control is I play Fortnite, then every time I'm like, oh my gosh, I'm burnt out from the day and I don't know what to do and I just want to feel in control, I should play Fortnite because that's the only way I can get this feeling, right? And so if we can give them other ways of feeling that, again, the neutrality helps here, because if I'm worried about addiction with Fortnite, I'm going to blame Fortnite. But if instead I'm like, oh wow, you really want to feel in control, let's try this other thing. How does this feel the same? How does it feel different? It's not the same as Fortnite. I'm not trying to make it the same as Fortnite, but what are we learning about ourselves from this? And then our kid is learning, Lord, I'm so sorry. Then our kid is learning, I can go play soccer with my friends, or I can go explore in the backyard, or I could play Fortnite, and I might get the same feeling from all of those things.
Yeah.
Anyway.
And I know it's good. And I'm pretty sure I've seen something where you're not a huge fan of Common Sense Media. Am I getting that right? But
I am a big
you
fan of
are. Okay,
Common
good.
Sense Media. I have a recent issue with them,
Okay.
which is about they took an undisclosed amount of money from OpenAI to
Yeah.
create AI educational materials.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
And
Okay.
I think that is a conflict of interest.
Okay. I was going to say, though, they do rate Roblox 13 up and up as well
Mm.
as Fortnite. And it's not super clear why, but for me, it is social media. And that's the age for COPA, which I don't want to get on
Oh,
that
good
rabbit
Lord, we don't have
hole.
time.
I know, but I don't think it's a younger kids game. I'm just going to be very upfront, just for all the reasons we talked about. And I don't think parents are as sophisticated as you or I, where they will go in and spend the time. And back to the digital privilege, do they even have the
Oh,
time to set those?
1000%.
So
1000%. Yeah, it's funny. My kid thinks that we like live near a place that has like a retro arcade,
mhm.
and we will go there. Like it's like a weekly after school, like once a week after school. And, they have like arcade machines, but they also have like some older consoles that are set up with things. And they have like an Xbox One or something that's running, like Fortnite. And we realized that our child seems to think that like Fortnite is like a game that lives at this arcade, which is not the worst thing for them to assume.
Yeah.
But it won't, like, we have only ever allowed anything on those kinds of big platforms at this arcade because it actually doesn't connect to any of the servers. And then we sit down and play with our kids. So they're still playing in a quote unquote multiplayer way, but it's local multiplayer. It's the two of us on a couch,
Yes.
right? And, I don't want my kid out on the wild west of those platforms necessarily. And I would much rather we're having some experience with it so that when we start having those conversations, I can say, like, well, here's why we've been doing it so far. Like, yes, we can play Fortnite when we are sitting together on this couch. No, if you're going to kid's house down the street that I don't know, no, you can't play Fortnite there. And we can talk about the differences in those things, because yes, they can function as social media, but like, frankly, social media doesn't always function as social media, right? I can use social media in a non-social media way. Like people who are very private, where their Instagram account is a photo album, right? It's not really social media. So again, it's talking about like, how are we using this? And if we're using it as a way of like essentially playing offline local multiplayer experiences so that my kid still has like sort of the same like awareness of cultural things, like cultural capital,
Yeah.
but is doing it in a safe way. Right. If you have the privilege and capacity to do that, maybe you want to do that. Great.
Yeah. I mean, what you just brought up too, just really quickly, you brought up the idea of playing together in person. And that's something we always give as a tip to parents, whether it's the parent playing with the child or to kids together in the same room. Synchronous experiences, generally with tech, are way healthier than asynchronous ones, right? And this is where tech can bring us together or tech can really pull us apart, right? When we're alone in our room, talking to strangers is very different than we're playing a game together with a friend. So I think that's another healthy tip. Is it
Okay.
synchronous or is it asynchronous? And is it a collective experience or not collective experience? So uh, asynchronous with tech would be like texting. I send you something, you write me back 4 hours
Mhm.
later. So sorry, two components to it. So for video games, it's more about collective or individual.
Right. And again, it's my kid playing online with like the next door neighbor and they could be in
Yes.
the backyard.
Yes.
Okay. That's a different conversation than my kid wants to play with their cousin that they don't live near. Right. And I don't want to prevent that technically not together experience because in that way it's actually more separation. Right. So again, it's thinking about like, is this increasing connection with someone that we don't have? Like, is this a substitute for, like, we can't meet this need in another way?
Yep.
Is this the tool that's going to allow us to meet that need? Okay. And if my kid is playing with a next door neighbor, I could say, okay, 15 more minutes of this, and then go actually see each other in the backyard. And because it doesn't have to be like, this isn't as good as playing outside. It could be, okay, finish this up and then go play outside. Like use
Yeah.
it as a transition so that we're
Yeah.
not blaming one thing. Yeah.
Yeah, that's a good tip too. Okay. I know you have so many of these in your book, but could you give me your top 3 quick tricks or hacks that parents can use to manage screen time? So you mentioned turn off the internet, which I love.
Mm-hmm.
It's super simple. You have a couple
Yes.
more maybe that we can add?
Yeah, sure. I can group that one and we can count that as one. I mentioned because we were talking about like open world
Yeah.
things and how difficult those can be to end. And that's something that has brought up a lot. That was like a major pain point.
Yeah.
And what was so eye opening for me is when I thought of it as an executive functioning issue, I was like, oh, I know exactly what to do if I am able to frame it that way. So again, seeing through to the skill, real helpful. And for me, there are 2 things that really help me with that. One is the question, how will you know when you're done?
Yeah.
Or what is the last thing you're going to do?
Hmm.
And that is something that I just got from my own pedagogical practice because I taught in a school where we would do very, very big projects, huge projects over like weeks. And so they wouldn't finish in any given class period. And so instead we had to say like, okay, class is ending in 10 minutes. What's the last thing you're going to do in this class period today?
Hmm.
And so it's a way to kind of give them an off ramp, so to speak, from this huge, amorphous, abstract thing
Yeah.
to how am I wrapping up what I'm doing? Because often that's hard. That's like the pain point is like, I don't know how to wrap up what I'm doing because the game hasn't provided me with a stopping point. So if we can provide that for them or if we can help them find one, then that can be a lot easier. And then the second is similar, but kind of looking at it from the other side. And it's what I call the sticky note trick. And it's to ask them, okay, what is the first thing you're going to do when you come back? Right?
Yeah.
What's the first thing you're going to do tomorrow, whatever, whenever the time is? And write it down. And like, I will put it on a sticky note, but put it wherever people will see it.
Hmm.
But like, I put it on a sticky note and I literally put it on the console. Like I did this with my kid and they said words to me and they meant nothing to me, right? Like I didn't know what any of these words meant,
Yeah.
but my kid did.
Sure.
And I just put it on a sticky note, put it on the console. And then the next day they came back and I was like, oh, it says you're going to do whatever these words are. And my kid was like, oh yeah. Great. And for many kids, and I think especially for kids with neurodivergence aspects in their lives, they reasonably get frustrated because they spend 10, 15, 20, 30 minutes just kind of chasing their own tail, trying to figure out what they were doing. And
Yeah.
that can be a big reason they don't want to stop, because it is a reasonable fear. Like the
Yeah.
moment I stop, I will literally forget, I will not know, and I'm losing this progress by stopping. So if
Hmm.
we can give them a way of saying like, oh no, actually, here's what you're doing, then it's like we've kind of offloaded that
Yeah.
and made it so that they're not going to have to spend any of that time. They can pick up right where they left off. And
Hmm.
again, they can do that when they are in the middle of cleaning the house and they have to run and pick up somebody from school pickup and come back. Oh yeah, I was washing the dishes, right? That's a skill transfer thing that's easy to see in other parts of their lives.
Awesome. Yeah, it reminds me of like even in like the corporate world or that level of executive functioning, they say like just write it on your list for the next day, right? To get the stress out of your mind. Like they say that too when you're thinking about something when you're going to sleep, like just write it down and it'll be there in
Mm-hmm.
the morning. So it reminds me of that. I'm going to add one that I learned from you that I still
Ooh,
use. Are you
ooh,
ready?
I'm excited.
Learned this like maybe a couple years ago. Guided access. Parents do not
Oh
know.
my gosh.
It's the best.
Thank you. How did I
Yes.
not?
Yeah.
Can I piggyback on that? Because
Please.
there was like okay, so uh, I'm not sure if your audience, should I summarize what guided access is?
Please, because I
Okay.
think it's the best.
Okay. Guided access is the iOS Apple term, but there is a term for it on Android devices. I don't know. You'll find it in the accessibility menu of your settings, but on iOS devices, you can make it a shortcut to triple click the side button, like the lock button. If you triple click it, guided access is an accessibility feature that basically freezes whatever's on the screen and it will not let them leave whatever's on the screen. So I originally did it when my kid just didn't have a lot of dexterity and was accidentally quitting the app. And then I'm like, I can't clean the house if I'm having to come back here every 2 minutes.
Yeah.
But it's also a great way, like if you don't want them to leave the video they're watching, right? You just start it and start guided access, and then that's what they're locked into. And until you have to put in like a password to then unlock it. So guided access is great. And then if you are already using guided access and you're ready for a challenge, again, I'm pretty sure this exists in Android, but in iOS, you can have what they call like focus settings, like different settings.
Hmm.
So you might have this for sleep or like a do not disturb setting. And you can make a custom one. And I have a custom one that I call kids.
Hmm.
And you can choose what apps like are on the screen. So I have like a custom kid setting. And the way I have it set is that it always shows like my third page of apps, whatever the third page is. So anything I know is like going to be fine if I'm like, here,
Yeah.
I'll be back in a minute. I just put it on that third page of apps and then I can turn on my kid setting and that's all they're going to see. The only downside of this is that if they like swipe all the way over, you can still see your whole library of things, but it at least like narrows what
Yeah.
they're seeing.
Yeah. I mean, not to harp on this too much, but the thing I love about guided access, in addition to everything you just covered, is one of the things that I don't like about iPads is the infinite nature of them. There's always another game to download. There's always another thing to go to. It eliminates the stress of too many choices for kids, right? So it kind of says, here's what we're doing. It creates maybe a mindfulness. So I like that part of it too. I've taken so much of your time, but can I ask you one more thing?
Yeah.
Um, and it's about EdTech because I know, but maybe, yeah, maybe we can just end there because I
Yes.
really want your thoughts on this. This is something that we talk about a lot. So it is a big business. And
Mm-hmm.
according to my research, in 2023, it was a 231 billion market size. We know that the pandemic really accelerated this. Funding for it tripled in 2020, and that was directly tied to the pandemic. So, what is your take on the rapid rise of EdTech and then now AI use in schools?
I think people assume that because I'm not like screen negative, I'm not implying that you are. I'm just saying that people assume if I'm not coming from a place of like, be wary of this, right, that I must be positive and like the opposite, like I'm neutral, right? And that means that I'm thinking about like, is this a net benefit, right? And yeah, man, if I could unring a bell on a thing, ugh, ed tech in many ways would be one of them. This is my like old man yells at cloud
Yeah.
thing from The Simpsons. I'm gonna drag out my soapbox. Yeah, so in ed tech we have a an acronym that SAMR, SAMR, stands for substitution, augmentation, modification, and redesign. And the idea is that, if we're using something, a technological tool, right? What is it doing? Is it a substitute? Is it augmenting or modifying the experience? Or ultimately, it's a pyramid, right? So ultimately it's a redesign. It's like completely changing our interaction and what we can do with the experience. And the vast majority of EdTech tools are substitutes. And I'm not talking about like if a kid, for example, needs to use speech to text, then that's not a substitute, that's a modification, right? Yeah. But if we've just transferred all of our worksheets into Google Suite products, then like we have substituted a digital worksheet for a physical worksheet. And I would argue that there's not really a purpose in doing that. And if anything, we're making our lives harder. Yes, EdTech. Yes. Again, talking about, I would say the proliferation of EdTech is a symptom. And I would say the problem is not necessarily a lack of regulation, but we have school districts who are being kind of told that all of their metrics and funding and all of these things are often determined by test scores, some very objective metrics.
Yeah.
And then the companies who sometimes are the same ones who design those tests are then coming to them and saying, we can improve your test scores with our new product. And in the last 5 years, those products have become increasingly technologically driven instead of being physical hands-on materials. And of course, there's very little overhead for that. You can change it continually. You're not, it makes sense from a business perspective why you would want to do that. And I would love to see schools, state boards of education require sort of an auditing process of these EdTech tools to actually look at like, how do we know that this is a better tool than what we already have? And a lot of these companies will say, well, like we tested it in a study, and it's like, okay, well, you tested it against nothing, right? Like they're not testing it against an equitably staffed classroom using hands-on materials. So yeah, would love to see less of that. And it's really hard because a lot of our classrooms just cannot go away from that because they don't have like up-to-date materials they could use instead. But if you're a parent who is concerned about sort of the proliferation of that technology, I would say like go to a school board meeting and ask like, how are we choosing these things? How do we know they work? How do we know they're better? And I would also, what I think is a very effective question is I would also ask, your teachers, your principals, your school boards, what is the barrier? What is the barrier that's preventing us from doing textbook adoption? What's the barrier that's preventing going back to hands-on materials? Because that's a very different question than why are you using this? Right? Like one of those is going to put them in a more defensive position, and the other is going to ask them to identify, like, what do we need to change to make this happen? If I ask someone what a barrier is, it's clear we're kind of on the same page, right? Like I'm trying to help as opposed to like blame. And yeah, the AI part.
Yeah.
My tinfoil hat is that they're just trying to replace educators.
Yeah.
The goal is to replace educators.
Yeah.
If the people designing the tests can then sell a product that is supposed to educate kids for the test and does it using AI that is then using student information to then try to change what they're seeing, they're trying to take educators out of it. And you could ask also your school, like, what is the policy on student data use with AI tools? Because they probably don't have one.
Yeah.
How do we know that our kids' data is being used safely with these AI tools? And I think those questions not coming from a place of blame, but more from a question of like genuine inquiry. And if people want to know more, there was an article that came out in Bloomberg a couple of weeks ago. I did a reel about it, about this very thing, about AI and education and the incredible rise of it, and how obviously the goal is not, I would say the goal is not to do best by kids and teachers.
Yeah.
But that article is a great read if you have not read it.
Yeah. I mean, I'll just wrap up with to piggyback a little bit about what you said. I think because I work with a lot of the school leaders and people kind of behind the scenes because we work in schools. So I see a lot of techno optimism when it comes to EdTech and AI right now going on in schools. And what we try to do, just like we try to teach kids and parents to just be good critical thinkers about tech, we try to teach administrators to also be good critical thinkers about tech. And it just goes back to a lot of the things that you mentioned already. And then I know we touched on the pandemic a little bit. You saw all the numbers kind of go like this: tech, screen time, every metric kind of like this. And it never kind of dipped back down, right? And thank goodness we had screens during the pandemic. We needed to, right? Like that was a necessity. But I think we just got on this trajectory and never kind of stopped to say, hey, is this the way we want to go? And then lastly, you touched on this, but there is paper versus pixel. We do know from studies that things like comprehension, sometimes, digital is not better than paper in a lot of ways, especially when it comes to younger kids. And then lastly, you probably know this, but Sweden's actually pulling tech out of their schools because they, have studied and seen the results. So I just wanted to throw those points back in, but
Yeah.
we're on the same page. We're completely on the same page.
Well,
Yeah.
and to come really full circle, though, it's again coming back to what's the barrier, right? Like Sweden's education system is probably smaller than that of my state,
Yeah.
right? I mean,
Yeah.
really, like I'm happy for them, genuinely, and like it's just comparing Sweden to the U.S. is just, I mean, it's apples and oranges, and I know you're not like, but
Yeah.
when we're talking about like, well, Finland's doing this and Sweden's doing that, it's like, cool. That's like saying what Pennsylvania is doing, or probably even less than that. But again, the barrier. So yes, we saw this huge rise. It was something like 60% of like elementary age kids had one-to-one devices pre-COVID, and that's up to like almost 90% now. Like you said, didn't go away. But how could it go away?
Right.
Because they invested millions, tens of millions of dollars. It's not like schools just they're not like whatever they're not like rolling around in bathtubs of money,
Yeah.
right? Like they don't have a substitute. The barrier is, okay, we haven't updated textbooks in 15 years.
Yeah.
We don't have $5 million to buy new textbooks.
Yeah.
And all of our kids have Chromebooks. So the barrier is we don't have another way of meeting that need. So again, it's like this whole interconnectedness where if we want to say like, hey, I'd really like to see us go back away from this, then we have to be having conversations about how do we redirect the like funding or support so that we can go back to this model, because when all that money got spent, well, now we have to use the investment. So yeah, it's unfortunately a quagmire.
Yeah. It's so true. So true. Well, I've kept you so much longer than I wanted. Thank you so much. I
You're
love
very
your
welcome.
take on things. I just think you're offering kind of a unique, kind of refreshing point of view. And I just love the non-judgmental tone and just sort of empowering parents, I suppose, to not feel guilty, right, about what they're doing. And so I couldn't agree with you more about the way you're doing things. And thank you. Your content's awesome. Your tips are awesome.
Well, thank you.
Thank you. So I appreciate your time.
Absolutely. Yeah. Fear is not empowering. So yeah, whatever we can do to help families empower themselves where they can. So
Love
thank you
it.
so much for having me.
Thanks a lot.